We mostly associate happiness with feelings, but my guest today argues that the feeling we call happiness comes from four brain chemicals we have inherited from earlier mammals. The four chemicals are dopamine, endorphin, oxytocin, and serotonin. These happy chemicals flow when our brain sees something good for our survival. My guest today, Dr. Loretta Breuning, is Professor Emerita at California State University in the US. She is the founder of Inner Mammal Institute and the author of several books, including Habits of a Happy Brain and Status Games. Today, I will talk to her about the four happy brain chemicals, how they work, and how we can get more of them to be happier. Dr. Loretta, welcome to the program and thanks for joining me.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Okay, thanks. So let's start with your childhood first. On the Inner Mammal Institute website, you described your childhood and you said you had grown up around a lot of conflicts. And you also said you are not convinced by the prevailing theories of human motivation, but everything made sense to you when you studied the brain chemistry of animals. Tell us about that journey from childhood to what you are doing today.
Sure. Well, when I was young, I saw a lot of unhappiness and I couldn't really understand why people were so unhappy. So I think I was always trying to figure it out. And then when I had an opportunity to study psychology, I was very interested in getting the secret to happiness, like you and so many people. But then that simplistic view that we should all just love each other and be nice and then everything will go right. But then when I had thousands of students and my own children, I saw that just being nice to people doesn't make them happy. In fact, that there's this sort of impulse to just go to the negative. And nothing I saw in psychology explained that until I discovered evolutionary psychology. And I found that animals have a lot of conflict between them. And their brain actually releases a good feeling chemical when they get a position of social dominance. I was like, wow, that really makes sense. This explains how people are. And despite what we say with our verbal brains about how things should be, it's the way people really feel and think and act.
I understand. So you argued in your book, Habits of a Happy Brain, that our brains were not designed to make us feel happy all the time. They're actually designed to reward behaviors that promote survival. So why is that?
So what I'm going to say now is explained in any introduction to evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology. So natural selection builds a brain that rewards you with good feelings when you do things that are good for survival. So natural selection is always selecting for things that are good for survival. So each of these happy chemicals, it's not that they reward you for just sitting around being happy and doing nothing. No, they reward you with a good feeling when you take action to meet a survival need. And that's why we don't get happy from just sitting on the couch, but from taking action to meet a survival need. We don't consciously think that. We don't consciously think of it as survival, but as my book explains, whatever triggered the chemical in your past wires you to seek more of it by repeating that behavior.
So we all actually got it from our ancestors. You talked about the neural pathways in our brain. So they're very influenced by what our ancestors did in their time. And one of the main things that they really focused on is searching for food. So we also have that neural pathways built and wired from the past, and that is still present in our brain, right? So this drive.
So here's the thing: we have two brains. We have the cortex, the brain you see in pictures that's pink and fluffy, and that is wired by experience. And then we have under that what's called the limbic brain, which is inherited from earlier mammals. And that's what controls the chemicals. So if you want to feel good, you have to get it from that mammal part of your brain, which is things people have heard of, like the amygdala and the hippocampus. Now, the two brains need to work together. So that's why we don't just seek happiness by grabbing food over and over. We can override that impulse. And even by the time you're 2 years old, you start learning other ways to feel good. But you also have to learn how to get your own food when you grow up. So we're always adding layers, connecting neurons, but we're always motivated by trying to repeat behaviors that triggered a good feeling in the past. And that doesn't require conscious thought because neural pathways connect. It's like the chemicals are paving on your neural pathways that make it easier to repeat a behavior that felt good before.
I understand. So let us now talk about the four happy chemicals that you mentioned in your book: oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin, and dopamine, and also tell us how they function and when our brain releases them.
Sure. So dopamine is just the simple feeling that you're about to meet a need. So if you're hungry and you don't have any food and you have to walk to the other side of the mountain to get food, then you're actually excited because you think, oh, as soon as I get to the other side of the mountain, I'm going to get food. So you could see how, like, our ancestors had to spend a lot of time looking for food, and dopamine made it feel good. Today, when you could get food easily, then it doesn't excite you. So that's why people are always looking for the next thing, an unmet need, something you don't already have, to trigger that excitement of dopamine. But if you got lost and you didn't have any food and you were really hungry, and then you got the most terrible food, it would make you happy because it was meeting a real need. Okay. So the next one, let's talk about oxytocin. So that's the good feeling of having social support. So people often have this idealized image of animals being in a group and getting the support of others, and everyone is nice to me and I'm nice to them and we all support each other. Well, this is not exactly how it works in the animal world. They have a lot of conflict in their groups, but they stay with the group because if they leave, a predator will eat them. So you could see how in the human world, people want to be with a group, but then when they have a group, they have conflict with the group, so they wish they could leave, but then they're worried that something bad will happen if they're alone. So then they look for another group. So oxytocin rewards you with a good feeling when you find a group and you get protection. So protection is what we're really looking for. And you don't get it easily because other people want protection too. So that's why it takes some effort to create like mutual support. And that's what we have to work to build that. And oxytocin is the good feeling that rewards you for building that. Now, serotonin is the good feeling of social importance. Everybody wants to feel important or special. And we're told that we should not feel that way. So people often say, oh, I don't care about being important. But it's easy to see that people do care and that it feels good. So in the animal world, if an animal is in a group, but it's at the bottom of the hierarchy, then it thinks, oh, I'll feel good if I can rise. Now, it's hard to accept that animals have social hierarchies, but there was a whole century of research on this. People could look at it's called zoology. Today it's called animal science or evolutionary biology. I mean, it's been studied for 100 years. So, and look for evolutionary biology. An animal that rises will get more food and mating opportunity, and its genes will be more likely to survive. So the next generation inherits a brain that's good at asserting itself and seeking social dominance by rewarding it with the good feeling of serotonin. Now, this is not what you hear about serotonin in the medical world, because most of what you hear is filtered through this ideology, this idealized view of life that people want to be true, and they ignore the rest of the story. Finally, let's talk about endorphin. So endorphin is the body's natural opioid. The word endorphin means endogenous morphine, and it was the first chemical to be studied, so of these happy chemicals. So many people use the word endorphins as this general synonym for good feelings. But in fact, if it's an opioid, so it did not evolve to just be on all the time. Like all the others, it evolved for a specific job. And its job, it's released when you're in pain. And it masks pain with a good feeling. Because in the animal world, if you're attacked and you're injured and you're in pain, but you still want to run to save your life, endorphin masks pain with a euphoric feeling for 15 minutes so that you can save yourself. And then either you die or you hide to protect yourself and let your injuries heal. Now, the importance of this is that in the modern world, people have created the theory that running is the key to happiness. I don't agree with it. Just in the interest of time, I'll say quickly. Running stimulates endorphin if you run to the point of pain. So many people get into this habit, this lifestyle, this cult actually, of exercising to the point of pain. And they think that will make them happy. And in the short run, it works because of distraction. Because once you get this endorphin high, you're not thinking about whatever's bothering you. And when you're chasing the endorphin high, you're also not thinking about whatever's bothering you. Also, you get some serotonin because you feel pride and one-up feeling of, I have higher status because I have reached this exercise milestone. And maybe you also have oxytocin because you think you get social acceptance from your exercise regime. So this is why this path to happiness has gotten a lot of attention, and maybe it works in a superficial way, but it distracts people from a deeper understanding of their real needs.
I understand. So this question just came to my mind. If we think about happiness from the lens of these happy brain chemicals that you have mentioned in your book, is it like universal? So someone living in the United States or someone living in Bangladesh, or let's say someone living in any European country, so everyone feels the feeling of happiness because of these four chemicals. It is not driven by the culture, it is not driven by the society you are living in, it is not driven by our community. Is it something like that? So is it the basic building block, the foundation of how we feel happiness, all human beings in this world?
So the answer is that the chemicals are universal, but each of us wires them in our own way. So for example, whatever made me feel oxytocin, gave me social support when I was a child, that connected neurons that turn the feeling on more easily today. So for example, if I smell garlic, and when I was a child, the smell of garlic meant something good is cooking, then maybe then I have a good reaction to that smell. Another person might have a bad reaction to that smell. So many people, when they were a child, they got social support in a particular way with particular activities. And so anything that reminds them of that past support, that makes them feel good today. And then they try to repeat that. And that could be good things sometimes, but it could also be bad things sometimes, because let's say a teenager gets social support when they do something unhealthy, and then that wires them to repeat the unhealthy behavior.
I understand. So we have talked about the happiness chemicals, and let's now move on to the unhappy ones. So that's cortisol, as you have mentioned in your book. So can you tell us about it and the role it plays in our survival?
Sure. So cortisol is known as the stress chemical, but really it's triggered by pain. and it causes the anticipation of pain. So a simple example is if I touch a hot stove, let's say I'm a little child, and I touch something hot and it hurts. So the bad feeling is a big surge of cortisol and neurons connect. And now the next time I see something hot, I pull back. I don't want to touch it because I anticipate that it's going to hurt. So it's designed to protect you by telling you when to pull back. So also, like, let's say if you are, all of my books are based on animals. So let's say I'm a little monkey and I am nasty to a bigger monkey, and the bigger monkey bites me, and that getting bitten hurts. So that teaches me the next time I see a big monkey, I'm not going to be nasty to him, going to hold myself back. So the good job of cortisol is to warn you of a potential threat so that you restrain yourself and protect yourself from the threat. But the bottom line is that when you have a big brain, you're so good at anticipating potential threats and triggering the cortisol in advance. So you can just anticipate threats all the time and fill your life with cortisol all the time.
So we have talked about the four happiness chemicals and also now the cortisol. So are they released naturally in our brain? I mean, can we do something externally so that they're released, let's say, in a certain amounts, or is the process completely natural?
Like I said with the happy chemicals, it's half natural and half wired by your past experience. So I'll give you a simple example. Many people in my country love to go to the beach. But when I was young, something bad happened to me at the beach. So I don't like to go to the beach at all because that bad feeling created neurons, and now the beach has a bad association for me. Okay. Another example, like I love to eat a certain food, but once when I ate that food, I cracked a tooth on it. So now that fear of cracking a tooth, a bad feeling flows. And now when I see that food, I don't want it. So it's partly natural and partly learned because whatever triggered it in your past, neurons connect, and that's how you make sense of it today.
I understand. Is there any system, like can we hack into our brain so that we can have more happy chemicals and less cortisol? Is it possible? What do you think?
Very good question. So I am not a supporter of hacks, just to give you a short answer in the interest of time. But I emphasize that we can rewire our brain one little pathway at a time. So I have this huge network of neural pathways in my brain, and the ones that you are young are extra large because when you're young, you have a lot of like paving material for your brain. But you can build new pathways. But I explain that it's like learning a foreign language, that everybody learned a language when they were young, but to learn a language when you're an adult, you have to do a lot of repetition, and it's boring, so people don't like to do it. So it's the same with your emotions. You could build a new pathway, but it takes a lot of repetition. But if you do it, then you'll have different responses. So people would rather have an easy hack that doesn't involve all that repetition and all of that, like you have to face your feelings and then you have to target the new feeling that you would like to have, and then design small steps toward it and reward yourself for each step and do it a lot. And then you learn to associate the new choice with the good feeling of the rewarding yourself. So it's possible, and that's good news. But if you expect like that there's some fast, easy solution, then it may sound like bad news.
I understand. So now let's talk about how these four happy chemicals influence the feeling of love. You have argued in your book that love is a cocktail of the happy brain chemicals, as it is hugely relevant to the survival of our genes. So tell us about love in that context.
So I'm talking about romantic love here because many people have promoted the theory that love is the source of happiness. And then they go on to define love however they want. And then whenever they get disappointed, they redefine love again and again and again. And yet people have noticed that romantic love is like a huge surge of emotion. And it's interesting to know that it triggers each of the happy chemicals. So it triggers dopamine because dopamine is about anticipation. It's when you anticipate that you're going to meet a need, like when a monkey sees food in the distance and it steps toward the food, each step triggers more dopamine. So it's the anticipation of the reward that makes you happy, which is why when someone finds love and then they have this perfect new spouse, and then a year later, they're not happy anymore because it's the anticipation was creating a lot of that. Now, the next one, oxytocin is stimulated by touch. And that's sort of a reliable thing in many cases, but the real underlying source of oxytocin is protection. So when a herd animal is in the herd and they're all around it, sounds like cuddling, but really it wants protection. So maybe you've idealized your partner and you think they will protect you all the time. But then maybe in the adult world, you see that like really nobody can protect you all the time. So that's a little disappointing, but that's what we need to know to not blame our partner for that. Now, serotonin is the status aspect of love. No one likes to admit it, but needless to say, when you have an opportunity to be with someone who raises your status in your perception, then you're like, wow, I want this person so much. And there are so many different ways to interpret status, but whatever way your brain interprets it, that's what turns on your serotonin about that person. And finally, endorphin is actually stimulated by laughing. And it's interesting to know that in the animal world, in the human world, laughing stimulates muscles that don't get used a lot in your abdomen, and that triggers a little bit of endorphin every time you laugh. And it's interesting that when people are in love, they're always making each other laugh over nothing, you know?
Yeah, I understand. And also, it has been said again and again. I think it has also been found in many studies that if you can make a person laugh and smile, that person will be attracted to you easily. So it is like one of the components of creating love between two people.
Yes.
But is there any other human emotion that is as powerful as love in terms of triggering all the four happy chemicals? What do you think?
So we said to the idea that love triggers all the happy chemicals because it's relevant to reproductive success. So nothing is more relevant than reproductive success, to love them. So let's talk about reproductive success. So nobody consciously goes into the world saying, I want my genes to survive as much as possible. And yet, in the not too distant past, people lost a lot of their children. And so to actually have enough children so that they survive long enough to have children who survive, and their children survive long enough to have children who survive, that was really hard. And yet you're here today because your ancestors did that. So we have inherited brains that you could say sort of obsess over the survival of their offspring. And one form of survival of the offspring is finding a mate. But then it's also protecting the offspring. And then you want your offspring to get the right mate. And then you want to protect your grandchildren. So anything that pushes all of that agenda is what excites people. And you can, I'm sure, see that in the world around you.
Yeah, I understand. So I think the next time I fall in love with someone, I will tell that it's not about you, it's about my chemicals. So these chemicals are driving my feelings towards you. And that's why I think I'm in love with you, because they are so important. But anyway,
And
how
you can
can
give them the book.
of course, I will. So, how can we build new habits that will facilitate the release of the happiness chemicals in our brain and help us be happier in the process?
So once you know what triggers them, then you could figure out, what am I already doing to trigger them? And if you think that some of those choices are not really good for you in the long run, then you could say, well, what would be a better way to trigger that chemical? And my book is full of examples of what's a better way to trigger each of the chemicals. Then you have to repeat that new behavior a lot, like I said, just like if you were learning a foreign language. So what would be a new way to trigger dopamine? To set a goal and take little steps toward it every day. And because you can't control the world, you need to set a few goals. And then when one of them is blocked, you can focus on another. Now, what about oxytocin? Well, we would like social support from others, but we can't control them. So what would be a way to get social support from others is to offer them your support. And then maybe they won't reciprocate today. Maybe they won't all reciprocate. But if you keep doing small things for others, then they could do small things for you. And I emphasize small things because if you buy someone a car, that doesn't mean that they will be nice to you, right? So, okay. And serotonin is about pride. So you could take pride in your own actions in small ways and focus on that every day, on what pride you take in your actions. Now, it would feel better. You would rather have other people applaud you, but you can't control that. And if you obsess over getting other people to applaud you, then you just end up frustrated and bitter. So you sort of need to applaud yourself. And the way I learned that is I read a lot of history and biography, and I learned that people who we know who were famous in the past, they did not get applause while they were alive. They mostly got appreciated after they died. And so I thought, what a shame, right? That if they knew that, they could have been happy then. So just start being happy today by applauding yourself.
Yeah, I understand. And I now have the last question for you. You are a Professor Emerita, and you have been making this content on these happy brain chemicals for so many years. My question to you is this: how do you get so much energy after all these years that you have been doing this for months, for days, for years? How do you get that energy? I'm really inspired by you, you know.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, the fact is, so I hated what I was doing until I was 52. And then I had the opportunity to take early retirement. So now I'm very grateful that I get to do something I like. So after I took early retirement at 52, I was a college professor for 25 years and I taught something else. And then I had free time to focus on what I believed in and to research what seemed true to me. And I'm always so happy to find people who are interested in this, because as you can imagine, the people in my real life don't want to hear me lecture them about happiness, and they haven't read my book and they wouldn't agree. They want to figure it all out for themselves. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, I understand. And also because your book and your content caught my attention, because, you know, I have been reading about happiness from the perspective of culture mostly. So in the word happiness, about the United Nations, it talks about like the GDP per capita, you know, life expectancy, and the corruption, equality, trust, these kind of things. So I didn't think much about happiness in terms of, you know, the chemistry or the neuroscience or that field. So when I found your book and also found some of your videos on YouTube, so I thought I should talk to Dr. Loretta and know more about this happy brain chemicals, because, you know, I have a science background. So I was reading physics, chemistry, and mathematics in schools and in college. I still love that. Although I have, let's say, I have not been in touch with the scientific subjects for more than a decade because I have been working in journalism. So it's mostly about, the arts and liberal arts and that kind of things. But I still love the science. And when I found your book and also your videos, so I thought, let's take a look. Let's understand what Dr. Loretta is saying, and let's try to understand happiness, not from the perspective of culture, because I have already done that, but from the perspective of science. And now I have got the opportunity to interview, and thanks for giving me time. It was really, really a fascinating conversation. And I really, really look forward to read more information from your book and try to understand more about this happiness thing from the perspective of neuroscience or whatever it is you can call. So thank you, Dr. Loretta, for your time.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
goodbye.